library instead of her own actual house. It would kind of make a lot of sense that she maybe does not have a thunder. On the contrary, though, these two of dialogue that are incredibly easy to miss or not put together kind of confirm that this is where Susie's hometown.
Hey, I thought we were in her house.
Specifically, Susie says, "Can we go to your house?" And contextually, in the English language, the way she says that implies that you prefer to go to Chris's house instead of her house. That's just how that makes sense. One thing I had never really thought about too hard was the existence of the scar on Susie's face in all of her sprites. For basically all of Chapter 1, Susie has her eyes covered by her hair like Chris does, only until she starts to feel more comfortable around us and comfortable in general does she stop having it over her face all the time and see the visible scar across her eye. There's a lot of ways she could have gotten this scar. Given the distrust she has for people she thinks don't like her, like she won't go to the diner when Caddy's there because she hates her, and she won't really talk to any of the kids like Monster Kid and Snowdrake because she knows for a fact they don't like her. It really is common with people who experience CA as a child where they just don't trust anyone who they're not super comfortable around because they're afraid I get angry for them. It was really nice in chapters 2 and 3 to start to think that Susie would have a new call home, living at Chris's house with them and Toriel. Toriel is and kind of Susie, and Susie really opened up around Toriel in a way that she still is opening up around other people in hometown with. Her demeanor and speech really changes. It really seems like Toriel is an adult that she genuinely trusts and cares about. The flashback with the hot chocolate thing also confirms that Toriel is the only adult in hometown that ever shows Susie any kindness. It also kind of seems like Toriel specifically wants Susie around for Chris. Something about chapter 1. What? Wait, you probably just heard my brain broke when I was trying to say that. I'm gonna keep that in the video, it's gonna sound weird as fuck, but let me explain. So, at the end of chapter 1, Toriel said this.
Chris, whatever have you been doing? I sat in the car waiting for you after school for half an hour. I called and called, but you never picked up. You had your poor mother
他们
worried
封锁了
sick.
仓库的入口，
I am afraid I'm going
要找到另一条路进去。
friend. But you friend. I will make it.
我操！
Now, this makes you think that Chris literally has never had a friend and never made a friend in school, which is unusual circumstances for that Toriel's willing to look past them not responding to her calls. That's exactly what I thought when I played chapter 1 the first time. I think that's what most of you thought. However, what about Noelle and Destiny? See in the flashback that the Holiday and the Jupiter family are like bond. And Noelle does talk about how Chris is distant from them. And yeah, I understand. Sometimes you can not see someone for a while. You guys just start chatting up again like nothing's changed. But I don't know. Something just feels off. Back to that. Toriel, in the entirety of the game, I'm pretty fucking sure mentioned Noelle one time. Here's my theory. I think Chris was probably such good friends with their brother and spent so much time with him that Des, by proxy, ended up becoming their best friend. There's one specific set of dialogue in chapter 4 that has really stuck with me for this theory, and I'm going to bring it up again later for semi-romantic and probably spending a lot of time together. Also, no one seems to talk about Des or Chris. And I do a lot of adults don't want to see a traumatic event around children because it's kind of easier to not talk about it after disappearance. The amount of pranks that Chris seemed to pull on the way, like it seems like Chris is desperately they're my property. She's message sister, and it kind of seems like Chris saw her as a punching bag, someone to constantly mess around and go through. Yeah, and I guess it's another form of well, some chapter. House puzzle tickets and it's triggered. Well, we make them out of error. I guess it would make more sense Toriel having this strong of a reaction to Chris making a friend what she acts like is the first time would make a lot more sense. Chris has been a lot more lonely and isolated from everyone in Noelle recently. Such a loner because the best friend they had previously died and their brother went off to college. I want to make it very clear that I do actually think Noelle and Chris were very close, or at least Noelle thinks they were younger. sometimes when you're a kid, you kind of have unresolved trauma. It's not that serious outrage or traumatic. Like because of your sister in a mystery. But kind of make that is unresolved trauma. You're laying down on you, affect your daily life, your personality, how you relationships that were involved. I think the relationship with Mel and Chris is going to be important. I will discuss a little more about that later because I think the relationship is the existence of this. My theory about this is that Chris and Jess were a lot more closer. If Jess does end up being the roaring Chris and the Knight gotta make a lot more sense. And as we learn from chapter 4 redraft, Carol is the person that Chris has been talking to on the boat. And at the end of chapter 4, around, you remind Chris that they promised what? Probably promised to help Carol. I'm sort of going to try to test back. Sorry for that. Toriel, I think, think about it. I mean, she literally
越来越近了。
outfit to wear. She really treats Susan like she's one of her own kids and seems to understand that Chris feels very close. This is all kind of destroyed. Chapter 4. I don't know how long this video's been going for this point, but this is probably the we talk about. Sorry you had to wait so long. Appreciate you watching. I hope I did it for you. I am a bit biased. I love her as a character because she reminds me so much of my fiance. I know a lot about maybe fictional characters, but even just down to the mannerism she acts reminds me exactly of how my fiance first acted when I met her around that age. The attachment she has for the situation at the end of chapter 4. She comes to Chris's home. Toriel is dancing with your guy, or probably kind of her interest, and his book is a fucking suit on falling off her ass. It is so heartbreaking. Nope. Susan's tired of changes. You gotta remember, the ending of chapter 4 just happened. They just killed a knight and everything. She just learned collecting it with I'll say just had like it start that right down in chapter. It probably was the last thing she had on her mind, same with Chris. And once I saw what was going on, I just said to myself, oh, this is gonna reminds her home life, and she's not gonna go play around ever again, knowing she drinks alcohol. Even if Toriel didn't, she's I still because she's comfortable enough to the point where she probably never want to go over it. I remember that. Back comes from Ruby talking about how long ago real is back when her as well as Carol was called that dynamic sport. I do think it's a little crazy that Chris was missing long that day and she did nothing about that. Choir practice with that Sans he's the guy who he's gonna hold her out and that'd be a humble because weird. Chris looks out the window, Susie walks away and seems to go to sleep where and to go at home where, we have no idea. I do honestly think this has been fixed. A self-harm abuse given out with the check or that Chris just has a fucking blood stain in him. Susie and instead of eating knows how to help Chris with stuff and then also real. Susie perfectly explains why she acts the way she acts and because she has to protect herself. If she wasn't the one hurting people, she was the one hurting. She had to act scared. She was scared. Trust me, that is very hard for her. The reason why when all information, she gets so fucking upset in chapter 4. Justified crash despite everything suffered probably awful childhood she has. Deep down, she is an incredibly heroic and person. Actually, cares about other safety. When she sees the knight, it is on site. It's crazy how it seems like she just wants to attack everything. not because she wants to get what she can. She's just attacking the monster because she feels pain. I think that's why Susie felt after learning the truth about the old man, aka the fucking no, she's a turtle actually. You know. Gerson is really the only person that tries to Susie anything. I mean, Ralsei does, just trying to teach her the dark world and everything, while Gerson is trying to teach kind of how to break them. While Susie finds Gerson annoying at first, I think she genuinely loves and respects that Gerson actually understands Susie. Gerson understands the weight and the importance of destiny and forging your own path. And I think that's all Susie. It really does seem parental bond when she finds out that Gerson is in fact dead to crush her, and she hopes that they can take Gerson back to Castletown and she can interact with him there. It makes sense that it's the very probably implies that all the dark fountains will close it back there, and that's one reason she has such a strong reaction to it, and says that Chris, Ralsei, and her will never let that happen because Gerson is the person that she never defeated them. And it really seems like it's kind of bothering advice and meant a lot to Susie. She's never had that in real life. And if you really look at Susie's main character, everything with a kind of conventional story arc in a way, it really doesn't meant to shit for you. That Delta CA and childhood trauma. Some people have the theory that the only characters whose voices are going to matter in the end is they're kind of able to bring the path to the game. Remember, Ralsei apparently basically knows how this is all going to go. He's basically watching a movie with people who haven't seen it for the first time, but he has. And there's a lot of things that happen throughout the story where Ralsei is not prepared for that to happen. That's not how it's supposed to go down. That movie seems to bother him, and all of them have to. Again, I think Toby Fox kind of wrote a lot of arc found escapism in the forest, specifically the character of Susie, to show how you can break away from your trauma and something greater than you imagine that your choices do matter. And we should get one character something that I hope gets to happen. I'm gonna get into the serious stuff now, but I want to say, my videos fluctuate way too much performance for any actual companies or sponsorship, and I have put out videos for never having a big show that it might really access private Discord calls. Exclusive role like community Discord call back and social voice all the tier for an affordable price. And it would allow me to make the experimental content that I make without an algorithm more smaller. As this video gets darker yet darker, I also just want to say that we're mostly inspired by what I've experienced and how that's
there you go.
Small preview. And of course, don't feel free.
That's why they made this video. They're projecting.
So, this is the part of the video where you guys are going to have to bear with me. Basically, everything I've said in this video has had some strong evidence behind it. This is where I'm going to dive ultimately into the life and really quickly to kind of support my theory, I want to talk about a few things that I think inspired Delta and his theming slash messaging. I think the themes and forms of CA, and even as they get revealed in the chapters, are going to be subtle in Delta. But this also kind of reminds me of Earthbound. Obviously, it was a massive inspiration for everything Toby Fox did, specifically for Undertale. And if you look at the games that you play as in Control and Earthbound, and you kind of look at your family family background, same kind of goes from other three. You're just kind of like, well, that's not right. Also, there's that Homestuck thing I heard about. Toby Fox may have been a fan of that. Another thing that I think inspired Deltarune was the whole classic Twin Peaks. There are a lot of similarities with the characters of Laura Palmer and Noelle Holiday, December Holiday as well, and just kind of the general vibes of Deltarune. It being this small town where everybody knows each other, but nobody knows each other. And the fact that there's certain weird things in the town that people just seem to not want to talk about, even though they probably should. And if the theories about Des being boring night and not weird, it kind of reminds me of the concept of almost where the worst part of someone's being manifested wants someone so to the point where it takes control of them and how they are everywhere. You know that Des had a kind of a weird method of disciplining Chris when they did something that we didn't approve of.
What? She was eating the chalk? Really? Wait, you're teasing me, aren't you, Chris? But you know, I see Gorilla eats kids. So, this is acting with all of that to stop lying.
And I kind of wonder if right now is like a station of the possible CA that just suddenly. That's my favorite television show and the greatest television show of all time, Mr. Robot, has the main theme of control is. Now, at first, this whole these seems like it's meant to be talking about technology and how it kind of strips away humanity from the modern world. We're so addicted to our computers and social media and smartphones, we kind of let them control us without us realizing it, as well as the concept of, and which refers to all of the powerful politicians and corporations that kind of decide what happens in our lives, our companies, without us realizing it. But as the mystery of the show unravels, I don't think it's a robot. As the show develops, the show has a lot more to do with our main character, Elliot, and they suffered as a child. Elliot is a character kind of like Chris, who is always constantly fighting for their situation and never being able to achieve it. Except for in the case of this robot, where Elliot finally learns about and remembers the trauma he suffered as a child, only then is he able to accept who on the inside, finally overcome it, finally having control of his mind and his body. It's absolutely done. And trust me, knowing this will not show much to you. Now, I cannot and Tony Fox has seen this robot or hell even. I am unshaken that he has seen this show, watched all the way through, and there are some things about this show that 1,000% inspired Delta. I've seen people make these TikTok edits about like that would have to be remote. Let me tell you, the character of this robot is very high. I really want to talk about one specific aspect of this robot that when I'm playing Deltarune, I just can't get out of my head. It bothers me so much because I keep questioning to myself, is the relationship Chris and Ralsei supposed to be like the relationship between Elliot and Mr. Robot? Mr. Robot, the titular character in the show, is a combination of the main character, Elliot Alderson, of Elliot's real-life dead father. Elliot is a character who has DID, dissociative identity disorder, and the way that this narrative device is in the show is so interesting because Elliot and Mr. Robot are the same person, technically. Their personalities trying to co-opt one body, one mind. So why does Elliot have this dissociative identity disorder? Why does Mr. Robot even exist? Without giving too much away, Mr. Robot was created as kind of a protector for Elliot. His separate personality of the robot exists because of abuse that Elliot suffered in the hands of the actual robot. When there's something that Elliot physically or emotionally handles, that's when the robot took over, or at least got involved, trying to protect Elliot from the worst. It kind of makes me wonder, is that what's going on with Ralsei and Chris? Like I said earlier in the video, I think the Dark Fountains are a psychological manifestation of the person who creates them. So, let's say I'm right for a moment. In Chapter 1 of Deltarune, there are actually two present Dark Fountains. At the end of Chapter 1, he goes to Dark Fountain in the card castle and surrounding areas. To do this as we end up in the classroom to the right of the Dark Fountain that hosts Castle Town. The way that Ralsei kind of implies that he's been here for a long time. And it also, we see throughout the game that Ralsei kind of has just like ravel Dark Fountain very easily. Anytime we end up coming and moving through a Dark Fountain, regardless of which one it is always able to be there relatively. I promise to actually create some at the start of the game in order to figure out there's a very hidden character to talk about. That is the Steve or Shaw cat motherfucker. Obviously, Steve is the first shopkeeper that we see in Chapter 1, and of course he comes back to our castle town after the first Dark Fountain is closed, and we can learn a lot of very interesting things from him. In Chapter 4, however, when we're exploring Azrael's computer, we learn that Azrael and Chris actually made a scene. When we first meet Chapter 1, we see him on the floor in the room, and Azrael was a teacher here. I would imagine that Chris and Azrael would probably play here as children, and that scene got left here one day by one of them. It seems like a lot of the objects in the dark world that come from the light world kind of bring memories of what happened around them. So why does this seem remember anything about Chris and Azrael? He's legitimately like first time. Yet he has all this weird information about the Shadow Crystal and John Mantle. One weird thing about all the Dark Worlds is they have this implied past history. Scene talks about his relationship with Jebel and how Jebel went crazy, so the king had him imprisoned away. It's so weird that these Dark Worlds were apparently just created out of thin air, but all of these things in the Dark World that are just manifestations of objects from the Light World have this weird history and lore. A lot of people have theories that Chris has been in Dark Worlds before. For a save point in the first Dark World Chapter 1, Chris is already on it. Is this just meant to show that you are taking over control for Chris, or is it literally showing us that Chris is before? You can say the reason that Steve doesn't have a memory of Chris is someone else created the Dark Fountain happened in that room. Isn't it interesting that a toy that Azrael and Chris created that for some reason doesn't have a ring of Azrael and doesn't talk to Chris like he knows us is in such a difference in the game. And when you don't get any of the Shadow Crystals, something that we rest is hope. Given that all of the secret bosses have some sort of ties of freedom, and Secret itself ultimately does as well, I think the reason the scene has such importance tells us a lot about Azrael. But if we're specifically talking about his time in the Dark World, we don't know last shot, but I think we can figure out. Also, we see the story in Chapter 1, we grit, and then we end up in the Dark Castle Dark Fountain, right inside the hallway in the school. We don't see the story here again until Chapter 4. We are traveling between Dark Fountain that had already existed, the one that we were in. Also, even just as much as the most recent Dark Castle Dark Fountain popped up recently. Scene doesn't exist in Castle Town Dark Fountain, it only pops up in Dark Castle Dark Fountain. Now, I could go on and on. I'll say that originally in this section, I was going to say that I think Azrael is actually the one who created Castle Town or Card Castle Dark Fountain. I'll explain why all this is important, but I think someone unbeknownst to us is the person who created Card Castle Dark Fountain. I think Chris is the person who created Castle Town. The name, the soundtrack, come on, but it all begs a question. I'll say that. Why? Earlier in this section, when I first started recording this video months ago, I had originally thought that perhaps Chris would by Azrael, or just suffered a general amount of neglect from their parents as for Toriel, but looking through the game, anyone like Asgore and Toriel did a lot to feel comfortable despite them powerful monsters. They're trying to make them feel like part of the family. More so, I don't think anything necessarily happens to Chris or dreamers. I think there might just be something wrong with Chris. Also, why is it every single time we are told a story about Chris and Azrael, it's about when they were like stories that Albert tells, the stories that your mother tells, even everything that Tenna talks about. Kind of weird that Azrael's supposed to be of college age, like a grown adult, yet the only stories we ever hear about their actions with Chris are from when the time when Azrael was probably like, I don't know, 11 or something around that age. Isn't it interesting? Also, like age Azrael should be right now. It's more similar to Chris's. If Chris is, I'll say, subconscious psychological manifestation or not, why, I'll say, around the age, and Chris probably has the best memory of Azrael from all of these three are from when they were so young. The relationship that Chris and Azrael had was grew up, started getting more popular. Azrael probably had 9% of Chris, but This was perhaps a for someone like Chris with intrusive violent thoughts of which he found out that Chris made the dark past. She decided to take it forward as real started
我为此耗费整整8年时间。
I go into this more in my most recent video talking about the whole Asgore running over Destiny. Yes, I did like a serious theory breakdown of that. Okay, look, go ahead and watch that. I want to know more about what I actually think Des might have been like as a person, and just more about Asgore and his whole role in the entire story of Deltarune and Undertale for that matter. So yes, I am telling you on top of however fucking long this video is, you're gonna watch me in like another 26 minutes. I promise you'll enjoy it. In the finals, there is some sort of lost girls, sort of lost voice. And 100% from this dialogue and everything we know about Death, she is the one who is truly lost. Did Chris do something to her as punishment? Is that why in Spamton's shop when Spamton's talking to the lost voice says that the promise Chris? What did Chris promise Carol? They know something about how to bring Ness back. Did Chris and their violent intrusive retaliate?
他们封锁了仓库的入口，
Some sort of way in
要找到另一条路进去。
Basically, a tutorial on how to start the route. And specifically in this route, we see Chris kill Ralsei. Required for strong in Shadow Mantle in local way, either because they don't want to look at the screen while we're doing this, or to make sure that Susie or Ralsei don't accidentally walk in on them, which is something that happens later. I wonder if it's possible that Chris had abandonment issues, like really bad, and ever since Azrael started spending a lot of time with Des and pizza / burger pants and other people around the town, Chris just felt incredibly lonely and isolated. It's really common with children who are adopted and have another son. Some sort of weird resentment towards their parents that they can't explain. Even though Asgore and Toriel did a pretty good job being loved and welcomed in their home and like part of the family, they still probably give more love to Asriel overall. So in a weird way, Chris probably felt somehow still like second rate to Asriel. Chris would never be their child. And that does ultimately make you look at your adopted parents differently. I know I've been putting a lot of like little details and screenshots and quotes on the screen, but I really want to talk about two very specific. You know, it's actually really cool that Toby Fox put in a fighting game have different video game mascots inside of it. This game that Toby Fox put in Deltarune was actually brought up during a conversation with Masahiro Sakurai, and this would later go on to inspire the Super Smash Bros. Franchise, for those who don't know. But we learned that Azrael and Chris used to play the game, and their parents actually bought a knockoff controller for Chris to play with. However, Azrael specifically chose to play with the knockoff one and let Chris have the real one to make them more special, not like that. I think Azrael was the person who made Chris so self-driven, like an outcast. So Azrael goes to college and stuff, and spends time with Chris over the years, and I imagine that probably for Chris a lot. We don't know anything about Chris' family and parents, and he never told Chris account. I'd like to think that they were adopted, but possibly Chris was being found and parents. Chris is definitely a loner, and everyone kind of sees that. It's like another character. And some of the Noel Holiday vlogs that got released by Toby Fox years ago, we find out about interaction that happened with Susie, and I'm gonna assume habits, Chris.
So that's the girl I keep talking about. She's really pretty Chris. Chris or no? Are they literally getting bullied? Do they just not care? Then again, who knows what Chris is thinking? I just don't get why they don't know their mom. Better. Kristen and Miss Alfie put her shoes up on the desk, getting dirty.
老大说谁都
She
不许
grabbed the
过去。
apple Bernie and Alfie 2 days ago, held it up, and started talking.
Hey,
Chris didn't look up.
hey, idiot.
Chris didn't look up.
Chris.
Susie rolled her eyes and said, horrible, irritating.
Nice shampoo. Right? Better be careful about wearing that around me.
Then she bit the whole apple in half, including the core. She even ate it. Just between our didn't know. I mean, those Susie. Anyway, Chris didn't react, so she continued.
Smelling like apples. Might end up like this.
Chris didn't react.
In half.
There was like the most awkward silence. Then, but it wasn't Susie. No, it was Chris. Just barely stifling some laugh. Did they think that was some kind of weird joke? Whatever it was, Susie must have thought she was getting made fun of, because she immediately just launched the apple right at Chris. But Chris, with her gamer reaction speed, held up their notebook like a shield and hugged it diagonally, bouncing it into the air, and actually caught it and took a bite. Though that made her mad. She ran over and grabbed Chris by the hair, staring into their face really close. I froze. I knew that if I didn't do anything, Chris would get hurt or worse. But something inside me just froze. I just stood there looking directly. Susie kept walking.
What's it? It's sick of this. That happened.
Susie laughed. I felt genuine.
Oh my God. And she'll finally realize how happy she was without you.
After all that, Chris didn't say anything at all. Susie exploded.
Say something, you idiot.
Felt like her voice echoed around the room forever. Then, when it finally went quiet, Chris's mouth looked like it. To be honest, moved so slightly I couldn't even tell if they said something or what. But whatever it was, her attitude suddenly completely changed. She let go of Kiss, backing off quickly, and left the room in such a hurry she could have easily won today's evening first. It seemed really refreshing to see her reaction, but I was so scared she would that I literally just jumped in the locker. In the end, all I could see through the little slats was her shape from behind, going towards the entrance of the school with her head held low. Finally, I took the entrance. I sighed, and suddenly all that frozen feeling that built up in my chest flew out of my body all at once. Holy cheese and crackers, I said to myself. I almost started laughing from relief. Then suddenly my locker's door flung open. Chris was standing there. I started to stutter hello. Just slowly shut the door. Well, that just happened, lol. Or the bullshit too. Maybe if I continue to she won't bother Chris as much.
Something Fox has gone on record saying that like the Stanford sweepstakes and the holiday girl vlog stuff, all that is just like an opinion. They'll just get like bundle with his face in there for people that will up the world and everything. I think this is another one of the tumultuous Tony traits that I think that they are a lot more important. There's just way too many intimate details that we learn from Noelle and Susie about her
Wow, how delusional they have to be to just not accept word of God like that.
Chris, while they were close to seemed to know each other. Now, I cannot prove what Chris said when I feel like Chris said something that made Susie cry. Something along the lines of, well, or was it perhaps something a bit darker than that, where Chris told Susie, go ahead, not and Susie did to that, perhaps, reach her out. I think that moment when by Susie the hot chocolate after finding her crying on the bench was really important to Susie, and Susie who's never really formed any connections with anyone, moving from town to town, never ever actually friendships, perhaps even having to move in with different foster parents, probably felt such a warm, genuine connection to Memorial, and the fact that her child was Chris probably made her feel really see his got probably wishes embryo foster parent. She would have given probably anything to be like an outcast, quote unquote, for your household. That's better than what she's probably. It can be very interesting thing. I'm so close when the relationship started. She'll kind of talk in a manner, but that's actually also how my relationship with my fiance and I started. She would her back, but then we kind of realized why we were pulling each other, and it's similar to our core. Speaking of core, we just pull apple core. terrible thing to do anyways. It's not that important now. So what does this have to do with it? I think ultimately this interaction between the shows had before we came along. Chris really doesn't know on their own. And they need some sort of figure watching over them, making sure that they can control themselves. I think that's a large part of why Raw needed. Could you imagine how the entirety of Chapter 1 would go with Chris and Susie exploring the Dark World of Lancer? As much as Ralsei can be good nature and influence on someone like Susie, he can also be that for someone like Chris. However, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention that I feel like there's a reason that Ralsei's name is Ralsei, not just Asriel too. And Ralsei doesn't look exactly like Asriel. Chris and Ralsei have this little exchange in Chapter 3, and depending on the dialogue options you choose, it kind of seems like the player, the soul, is trying to imply that Ralsei looks similar to Asriel. Chris doesn't seem to think so. When you leave your house in hometown, Chapter 4, you're running around with Susie, you can go to the bridge, look at a picture of your brother. Susie gets weirded out and goes, wow, I'll say what that's real. And Chris, 100%, does not agree with this. It really seems like Chris mentally likes to keep Ralsei and Asriel as separate entities in their head. They don't like to see them compared. When Chris is looking through all of the stuff in S's this text box ends off with, looking at this makes your head hurt. Why? Well, my initial thought, as with most people, is that Chris feels a strong level of guilt for what happened to S. It's obvious to imply that some of the stuff in this box that we're looking through belong to Asriel. But that looking at this stuff makes your head hurt is not because it's still a trauma. It's being reminded of something that happened to them, which didn't. It's really interesting given the characterization that Asriel is given in Undertale. You gotta remember, Undertale is a parallel story to Delta Rift. There's no way getting around that, and Asriel Dreamer's name steal an anagram for serial murder. I love the theory out of this character is secretly evil, and I don't think that Asriel's CA is a very complicated thing, especially with things. And sometimes things are done very unintentionally, especially with emotional abuse from siblings. And when you're like a teenager and have a younger sibling, sometimes you don't realize how things affect your younger sibling until you're older, and maybe we'll see what happens with that later on. I think Ralsei is supposed to be kind of like a Mr. Robot figure to Chris. Chris doesn't like when people compare Asriel and Ralsei. Ralsei is a manifestation of what Chris wanted Asriel to be. Or continue. Everything we know about Asriel still suggests he's a sensitive soft boy similar to Ralsei, and I'm very curious to see just how much potential this direction was or not. I hope that wasn't good, but to me, there is one relationship. Relationship with Chris and Ralsei. I really do think the strongest argument is that the player interacted with the throughout the game. Some people that probably watch this entire fucking video all the way up to this point and then only out for some reason. But Chris being non-binary is not just like a funny, quirky thing about them. Gay or LGBT points. I do believe Toby Fox wants to promote diversity. Very obvious. Chris being non-binary is very specific. Chris like they have struggled with it. Now, obviously, when we're inhabiting Chris, they won't talk, but it also doesn't seem like they used to